So to get things going, I would like to quote from the introduction to your book. Okay. You say, in recent years, it has become clear that there is a war going on, a war on the West. This is not like earlier wars where armies clash and victors are declared. It is a cultural war, and it's been waged remorselessly against all the roots of the Western tradition and against everything good that the Western tradition has produced. And in this text, you make several key points. First, a lot of us sense that there is something wrong in politics, in schools, in journalism. And it's also clear to many of us that language is being manipulated before our very eyes. However, a lot of people are led to believe that those weird changes that we see are being made for our own good, that they would make our societies more just and more inclusive. So what's the truth behind this? Is this really an attack? And if it's an attack, who's behind it?
It's a very important question, and it's very important to get it in the right context. I wrote about this a bit in my previous book as well, The Madness of Crowds. But as I see it, let's steel man rather than straw man the argument of, let's say, my opponents or the people I'm criticizing in this book and others. They claim that what they're after is a more equal and a more just society. Now, I actually think that none of that is at all able to be disagreed with. I think almost everybody from across the political spectrum would say, okay, of course, we all want a more equal and just society. People diverge on the question of what is it that you're really after that? So, for instance, if you say you want equality in society, do you mean equality before the law? Or do you mean, for instance, equity, which is what much of the modern left actually wants and says it wants, which is that everybody's outcome in life should be the same, irrespective of achievement, ability, effort, and much more. Likewise, there are rights movements, again, I wrote about this in The Madness of Crowds, which say they want equality and freedom and actually want a form of superiority, to be treated rather better than other people. Now, the way I see it and the way I try to explain the war on the West is that this includes now an attempt by people to say that they are trying to equalize the historical terrain. To say, for instance, we haven't had enough criticism of ourselves historically. We've thought ourselves better than other people, and therefore it's time to equal the playing field. And here's where I think that we are. I think societally in the West, as in some of the modern rights movements, the train was just about to pull into the station, then went roaring off into the distance and veered off the tracks. So I'm all for a suitable estimation of our historic past in the West. Most people, I think, are. What I am not for, and what part of the modern left in particular is for some kind of historical accounting to occur that takes, in my view, in my analysis, a very, very uncharitable, to say the least, analysis of the West's history and a wildly charitable view of the history of everyone else. So that, for instance, everything at the moment in Western democracies is looked at through the lens of what is described repeatedly, particularly in America, where I am at the moment, as the original founding sins: the sin of slavery, in Europe, the sin of colonialism, the sin of racism. And these three founding sins are being seen as not just a part of the history of the West, which they undoubtedly are, but as the history of the West. And these things are wrenched out of their context and are now used effectively to bash the West over the head with repeatedly, including all the citizens of the West, to say that people in America who have no involvement with slavery should feel some kind of deep angst about it, and indeed pay up for something that they had no benefit from and no involvement in. These are all manifestations of the problem. This deep animus, which is fueling so much of the modern left in particular, it's not just the left, it's mainly on the left. They are being fueled by an animus against the origins of the societies that they live in. And it's extraordinarily destructive. And I think it is highly unlikely, to say the least, that the game that they are engaged in is likely to get them to the outcomes they profess to desire. I.e., even if you do this for decades, it is not remotely clear that you get more peace, more justice, more equality in your society. In fact, I think quite the opposite. I think you put a powder keg underneath the society that was getting on pretty well.